The simmering tension that has defined the Republican Party for nearly a decade has, in the space of 48 hours, erupted into open rebellion. In an extraordinary breach of party discipline, a critical mass of senior Republican senators, backed quietly by a growing number in the House, has moved to formally censure and curtail the emergency powers of a former president from their own ranks, Donald J. Trump. This is not a skirmish over policy or personality. It is a direct, procedural, and profoundly political assault on what these lawmakers privately describe as an unchecked and dangerous concentration of influence. The mutiny, sparked by Trump's latest invocation of executive authority to redirect congressionally approved funds, represents the most significant internal fracture in the GOP since the era of Watergate, signaling that the long-feared breaking point has finally arrived. What makes this rupture seismic is not merely the act of defiance, but the identities of the defectors. These are not the usual moderate suspects from politically competitive districts, but staunch conservatives and institutionalists with safe seats and decades of tenure. They are figures who have, until this moment, largely navigated the Trump era by voicing quiet concerns publicly while falling in line when votes were counted. Their decision to now co-sponsor the Executive Powers Review and Censure Resolution is a calculated nuclear option, a declaration that the perceived threat to constitutional governance from within their party has surpassed their fear of electoral retribution from its base. The resolution, while symbolically naming Trump, is crafted as a permanent legislative change, aiming to claw back authority future presidents might wield, a clear indication that this crisis is about more than one man. To understand the profound gravity of this moment, one must revisit the gradual, then precipitous expansion of presidential power that has characterized the last 2 decades. The post-9/11 era saw a dramatic shift, with both Republican and Democratic administrations leveraging broad authorizations for military force and national security directives to operate with unprecedented latitude. The legislative branch, mired in partisan gridlock, repeatedly ceded ground, finding it politically expedient to let the White House take contentious decisions on issues from drone strikes to economic sanctions. This created a fertile ground for a presidency like Trump's, which operated on a theory of maximalist executive authority, often testing the limits of what was legally permissible through aggressive use of signing statements, regulatory rollbacks, and the strategic declaration of national emergencies. The specific mechanism now under fire, the National Emergencies Act of 1976, was itself a reform intended to rein in presidential overreach. It provided a framework for declaring emergencies, but also included provisions for Congress to terminate them. In practice, however, the act has become a tool for presidents to bypass congressional stalemate. Presidents from both parties have used it, but the scale and frequency escalated notably under Trump, who used emergency declarations to fund border wall construction after Congress refused to appropriate the money, a move that set a powerful and, for many institutionalists, alarming precedent. It demonstrated that emergency powers could be weaponized for domestic political projects, fundamentally altering the balance of power between the branches. Trump's post-presidency has been an unprecedented phenomenon in American politics, retaining a vice-like grip on the party apparatus while operating from a position of immense legal and financial vulnerability. This duality of kingmaker and defendant has created a perpetual state of crisis within the GOP. His continued ability to mobilize his base, dictate primary outcomes, and command absolute loyalty from a majority of the party's elected officials has stifled internal debate. However, his recent legal entanglements and his escalating demands for absolute personal loyalty over institutional or constitutional fidelity have steadily raised the stakes for those who must balance allegiance to him with their own oaths of office. The immediate catalyst for the rebellion was Trump's latest directive, issued from his Mar-a-Lago estate, calling on Republican governors to deploy National Guard units to the southern border under existing emergency declarations and to actively resist federal coordination with the current administration. While legally dubious and largely symbolic, this move was perceived by a core group of Republican senators as a brazen attempt to commandeer state militias for a personal political agenda, creating a scenario perilously close to insurrection. It crossed an invisible but deeply felt line, transforming abstract concerns about authoritarian drift into a tangible, immediate crisis they felt compelled to address through formal congressional action. Behind the scenes, the move to draft the censure resolution was not a spontaneous act, but the culmination of months of clandestine meetings and hushed conversations in the corridors of the Capitol and over secure phone lines. A small, tight-knit group of senior senators, their careers spanning the pre-Trump GOP to the present day, began quietly comparing notes on their growing disquiet. They consulted constitutional scholars, retired generals, and elder statesmen from previous Republican administrations. The planning was meticulous, with a focus on crafting a resolution that could not be easily dismissed as the work of rhinos or disgruntled moderates, but would carry the weight of conservative constitutional principle. The text of the resolution itself is a masterclass in legally nuanced political warfare. It avoids flamboyant rhetoric, instead grounding its critique in a detailed review of the historical use and abuse of emergency powers. It cites the framers' intent, judicial precedents limiting executive overreach, and specific instances where the legislative branch has failed in its duty to provide a check. The censure of Trump is embedded within a broader call for a bipartisan select committee to review and reform the National Emergencies Act, a clever move to attract wary Democrats and frame the issue as one of institutional preservation rather than partisan vengeance. This framing is crucial to its architect's strategy for survival. Publicly, the party leadership has been thrown into disarray. The Senate Minority Leader and House Speaker have issued tepid, contradictory statements attempting to condemn the unauthorized use of emergency powers while simultaneously affirming their continued strong support for Trump's border policies. This impossible straddle highlights the existential trap the leadership finds itself in. Their authority, derived from Trump's base, is evaporating by the hour as more rank-and-file members, sensing a shift in the tectonic plates, begin to quietly express sympathy for the rebels' stance, if not yet their method. The reaction from Trump and his inner circle has been one of volcanic fury, framed not as a political dispute, but as an act of betrayal worthy of excommunication. In a series of blistering statements and Truth Social posts, Trump has labeled the rebelling senators cowards, traitors, and the dumbest people in politics. More ominously, he has directed his political action committees to immediately begin funding primary challenges against every co-sponsor of the resolution, promising a purge of historic proportions. This escalation has turned an internal policy disagreement into a bloody civil war for the soul of the Republican Party, with every member now forced to choose a side under the glaring spotlight of national attention. The political chaos unfolding in Washington is being watched with a mixture of alarm and calculation in state houses across the country. Republican governors, particularly those with national ambitions, are facing immense pressure to declare their allegiance. Some in deep red states have echoed Trump's condemnation, hoping to position themselves as his rightful heir. Others in more purple states have cautiously welcomed the congressional review, emphasizing the importance of constitutional balance. This geographical split mirrors the deeper ideological fault line, suggesting the party may not simply fracture, but could potentially regionalize, with profound implications for the electoral map and the future of federalism. Financial backers, the lifeblood of any political movement, are also beginning to pick sides. Major institutional donors, long uneasy with the volatility Trump brings but fearful of his base, see in this rebellion a potential off-ramp to a more predictable, policy-focused conservatism. They're quietly opening channels to the rebelling senators. Meanwhile, the small-dollar donor apparatus, which Trump commands with peerless efficiency, is flooding the rebels' prospective primary opponents with contributions. This financial bifurcation ensures the conflict will be long, bitter, and well-funded, acting as the accelerant for the division. Media ecosystems already polarized are amplifying the conflict into mutually incomprehensible narratives. On right-wing news channels, the rebellion is painted as a deep state orchestrated coup by establishment figures desperate to reclaim their lost power. In more mainstream and left-leaning outlets, it is covered as a belated but necessary stand for democratic norms. This narrative divide makes compromise or even coherent national dialogue impossible, as each side's constituency is fed a radically different version of reality, deepening the national schism. Internationally, allies and adversaries alike are recalibrating their understanding of American stability. European capitals, long concerned about the drift of American politics, view the rebellion as a potentially positive sign of institutional resilience, yet fear the short-term chaos it unleashes may render the U.S. an even more unpredictable partner. Authoritarian regimes in Beijing and Moscow, however, are gleefully amplifying the discord through state media, portraying the crisis as proof of Western democratic decay and the weakness of a system where even his own party cannot control him. Global markets, sensitive to political instability, have shown pronounced volatility, with the dollar dipping and bond yields fluctuating on the uncertainty. Legal scholars are intently examining the constitutional ramifications. While the censure resolution itself is a political act without direct legal force, its companion call for reform of the National Emergencies Act could have lasting impact. This is a watershed moment in the long, slow-burning debate over the imperial presidency, says Dr. Eleanor Vance, a constitutional historian at Yale. Congress has been in a state of abdication for years. This rebellion, whether it succeeds or fails legislatively, represents a faction within the legislature suddenly reasserting its atrophied muscles. That alone will force a recalibration of the separation of powers, potentially for a generation. Military and intelligence officials are observing the situation with profound professional concern, speaking anonymously due to the extreme sensitivity of the matter. The potential for the politicization of the National Guard, hinted at by Trump's directive, represents a red line for many in the Pentagon. The public involvement of senior retired officers on the side of the rebelling senators is a telling indicator of where institutional military sentiment may lie. This introduces a sobering national security dimension to the crisis, elevating it beyond mere political gamesmanship to a question of civil-military relations. The long-term consequences for the Republican Party are existential. The party now faces a trilemma. It can fully recommit to Trumpism, purging the rebels and becoming a personality cult with diminishing appeal beyond its core. It can split formally, creating a new conservative party and ceding national power for a generation. Or it can endure a prolonged, debilitating civil war that consumes its resources and focus ahead of a pivotal election cycle. Veteran political strategists from both parties agree there is no clean path forward and the party's structure may be permanently altered. For the Democratic Party and the Biden administration, the crisis presents both opportunity and extreme danger. The opportunity lies in watching their principal opposition tear itself apart. The danger is that an enfeebled, radicalized, or unpredictable opposition makes coherent governance and necessary bipartisan compromise on issues like the debt ceiling or national security impossible. Some administration officials privately express concern that a cornered Trumpist movement, stripped of internal checks, could become even more destabilizing and extra-institutional in its tactics. The immediate political fallout will be decided in the coming weeks as the resolution moves or is forced to a vote. The whip counts are shrouded in secrecy, with many senators publicly non-committal. The rebellion's leaders need to secure a simple majority to pass the censure, a symbolic but devastating blow. To actually reform the Emergencies Act, they would need to overcome a filibuster requiring Democratic support, a scenario that would brand them as collaborators with the enemy in the eyes of Trump's base, but could cement their place in history as institutional saviors. Beyond the Capitol, the grassroots reaction is the great unknown. Polling shows Republican voters remain overwhelmingly loyal to Trump personally, but also show growing unease with constant chaos and a desire for effective governance. The rebels are betting that this quieter, exhausted majority may be ready for a change, or at least will not violently reject those standing on principle. It is a high-risk gamble. Early town halls held by the rebelling senators have been shouting matches, a microcosm of the national meltdown. Looking ahead to the next election cycle, the landscape is now fundamentally scrambled. Primary races across the country will be referendums on this single issue: loyalty to Trump versus the constitutional principles outlined in the censure. This will push candidates to extremes and could produce a Congress filled with even more fervent Trump loyalists or a surprising number of emboldened institutionalists with little middle ground. The presidential nomination process itself could become a contested convention of historic proportions, a scenario the party's rules are ill-equipped to handle. The risk of escalatory violence, while still considered low by analysts, is now a factor discussed in security briefings for members of Congress. The inflammatory rhetoric from both sides, coupled with the deep personal devotion Trump commands, creates a tinderbox. The rebelling senators have reportedly seen a sharp increase in threatening communications, and their security details have been strengthened. This palpable fear adds a grim personal cost to their political stand, underscoring the extent to which democratic norms have been eroded. In a broader historical context, this rebellion may be seen as a last-ditch effort by one strand of American conservatism, the one rooted in limited government, institutional restraint, and a Burkean suspicion of radical change, to reassert itself against the populist, personality-driven, ends-justify-the-means revolution that Trump embodies. It is a clash of two incompatible visions for the right, and only one can prevail. The outcome will define not just a party, but the nature of American political opposition for decades. Should the rebellion fail and Trump's faction successfully purge its critics, the precedent will be indelible. It will cement a model of politics where intra-party dissent is treason, where loyalty to the leader supersedes all other ideological commitments, and where the tools of government are seen as extensions of personal power. This model, once normalized in one major party, would inevitably infect the entire political system, creating a downward spiral of tit-for-tat norm destruction. Conversely, should the rebellion succeed in fundamentally altering the party's trajectory, it will not be a return to the pre-2016 status quo. The genie of populist anger cannot be put back in the bottle. Instead, it would likely result in an awkward, fraught coalition, perpetually on the verge of splintering, but perhaps capable of governing through a philosophy of conservative pragmatism rather than perpetual revolutionary grievance. The nation's political health, however, requires at least one functional, coherent major party. The global implications of failure are severe. A United States with one political party hollowed out as a check on executive authority or consumed by internal strife is a United States that cannot project consistent leadership, honor long-term alliances, or credibly champion democratic values abroad. It creates a power vacuum that rivals are eager to fill, not with military might initially, but with economic influence and strategic patience, rearranging the world order begun in 1945. As this drama enters its most critical phase, the actions of a handful of senators will resonate far beyond the marbled halls of the Senate. They are navigating uncharted territory, with the maps drawn by the founders offering only vague guidance for a crisis of this modern nature. Their calculus is part principle, part survival, and part an attempt to salvage a version of their party from the wreckage of the past 8 years. The nation watches, holds its breath, and understands instinctively that this is not a normal political dispute. This moment, therefore, is a profound stress test for the American system itself. It probes whether the constitutional safeguards, designed for a slower age of horse and carriage, can withstand the pressures of modern media, tribal polarization, and a figure who commands a movement that often views those very safeguards as obstacles. The breaking of ranks among Republicans is not the end of the crisis, but the true beginning of a climactic chapter. The outcome will write the preface to the next volume of American history, determining whether the pendulum of power begins to swing back toward a collective Congress or continues its dizzying arc toward a personalized executive, leaving the nation permanently altered in its wake.